Remember, you've always wanted to start learning that new language, but never managed to reach lesson number 2. What techniques could you use, and which tools could help you reach your goal? We interviewed Richard Simcott, hyper polyglot. To learn a few tips about language learning, welcome to this podcast. We explore digital training, technologies, and insurance. I'm Philip, co-founder of the Engage Institute. We offer innovative training solutions for insurance companies worldwide. Do you struggle to capture the knowledge of your experts? Contact us. We'll record engaging interviews with them for you to share. Now, join me as we delve deeper into the language world together. Today on the show, I have the great pleasure to welcome Richard Simcott. Hi, Richard. How are you doing?
I'm doing well, thank you. How are you?
I'm very excited to talk to you. It's been a while since last time we saw each other. I think it was in Berlin at the Polyglot Gathering.
Wow, yeah, that is a while ago now, because it's not been in Berlin for many years.
2012, I think, if I'm not mistaken. But yeah. So for some of our viewers who don't know you, Richard, you speak 50 languages. Only?
Well, I've studied over 50 languages, but studying and speaking are two different things. So I would never say to anybody that I speak 50 languages.
And I saw that you're able to conduct and to work really in 16 of them. That's quite an achievement.
So, I use my languages for very different reasons. And the 16 number, I think, comes from probably the video that I first put on YouTube, which was a display of 16 of the languages I studied at different levels. And it was to highlight that we're all at different stages with language learning. And really, it's fine to be starting, it's fine to be somewhere in the middle, and it's fine to be at a point where you've used them professionally or for education. And I continue to use a number of them for work and for social reasons to this day.
So you're British, you were born in England, and obviously first language is English. What is the first language you learned after English?
After English, the one that I learned to communicate fully in was probably French.
Oh, okay. And just to ask you the regular questions, what is your favorite language, if there is one?
Yeah, my favorite language is German, and that's probably because I learned it in a German family with German kids. And so when you learn a language with children, it's always something quite special because you remember all the fun playtime activities, playing in the sandbox and all that kind of stuff. So yeah, I was an au pair in Germany. And so that was a really nice time for me in my life that I like to look back on.
So that's an interesting answer because your favorite language is German because you associate some very pleasant moments with it. You don't say it's because it's the most interesting grammar, vocabulary, or accents.
No, and I think that's kind of a normal human tendency. So, for example, if children grow up being told off and they have negative associations to a language, they may reject it. They may not want to speak it. There can be trauma attached to language, and there can also be positive things attached to language. And I think we see this the world over where people would not want to speak certain languages for political reasons even, or emotional reasons, or historical reasons, or reasons of just behavior or things that they've observed or experienced in any given country or from any given group.
So how do you choose these languages that you learn? Because that's quite a big number. Do you just go alphabetically and learn all of them?
No, fortunately not. If I were potentially a piece of technology, a piece of AI, maybe that might be the way I'd do it in alphabetical order. But no, languages tend to choose me. I have a choice of languages. For example, when I was at university, it was a choice of languages that I could study. And so sometimes it's just an interest maybe in a country or a culture, or I've heard the language somewhere, or it's friends or family that have had connections to a place. And that can be a driving force. Sometimes it will be I'm going on holiday and I end up really liking the place, liking the language and the culture. So I may dive deeper into it. And sometimes it's a passing thing. So I may study a language for 3 months or a year and then not use it again for many, many years and have to go back and revisit it or relearn it.
I guess after a while, once you've learned so many languages, you might approach this more from a language family rather than just the language itself. Is that how you see it?
Yeah, there is a huge benefit for me in studying languages from the same family. And that is because you get to see the crossover of shared vocabulary or grammar way more easily. And you see these connections between languages and peoples and communities. That's not just in the same language family, though. You would get this kind of feeling if you were to study a language that's spoken in a country where it's surrounded by other languages. And you see how maybe people have done business together or traded over centuries, and how the languages, even though they're not related, mix. So, for example, in the Balkans, there are many, many Turkish words in many of the languages. And that's because of the Ottoman Empire. So when you're learning languages, whether it's language families or whether it's languages that have a relationship because the communities have a relationship, you learn a lot about history and about the cultures involved in the whole process and the whole makeup of the entire picture.
And I understand that you're very interested also in the political aspects linked to languages. Languages are a political tool too.
Languages can be a political tool. They can be used to make a statement. Like, for example, Vladimir Zelensky uses Ukrainian now in his speeches, and he is from a Russian-speaking family, and still he uses Ukrainian to make a statement. So they can be used in that way, absolutely. Do they have to be? I would say not necessarily. The reason why they're often seen as political or politicized can be because there's always a power struggle within countries, communities, nations, areas of the world, regions, where there's almost a fight for dominance. And so dominant groups, dominant people, dominant cultures will often feel the need to subjugate or unify, or however they want to phrase it, certain other groups within a society or within a region to be able to be top dog. And that is something that happens because of human nature, because there's a desire within human nature and has been for millennia, I guess. And you see it replicated all over the world.
So the polyglots or hyper-polyglots, these people who speak a lot of languages, is that a way for you to avoid what you described, but to immerse yourself in the different cultures and show more respect for the local culture by using their own language?
For me personally, yeah, using a new language is a sign of respect. Any language for me is a sign of respect. I don't necessarily feel the same effects as those communities with the politicization of a given language. So as far as I'm concerned, all languages are equal, just as all people are equal. On the face of it, obviously, people do see stratas within societies, within groups of people, within linguistic communities. I'm not blind to the fact that people perceive and observe, and even if they don't do this on a conscious level, they will certainly do it on a subconscious level because of learned behaviors and because of social norms. So do I buy into this? Well, I guess it's a process of unlearning within your own social structures and understanding true diversity or diversity of thought is really intrinsically linked with this almost, if you will, decolonization of the mind. And this is something that is quite a hot topic, I think, in a number of spheres for a number of different reasons. But I think that decolonization of the mind is probably a good way of thinking of it, because you're deconstructing the norms of one dominant group writing history or giving their side of the story above others, because often we don't hear all sides of every story. We do hear the loudest voice because it's the one that rings out loudest over the largest distances.
So this decolonization of the mind, and I like very much this expression, that's something that you say, okay, that's a great way to approach people in a better way and to really have an equal basis around the world.
As far as we can. Absolutely. I'm a realist as much as I am anything else. And so I like to ask open questions and to listen to all sides of every story, because one thing I've learned through language learning is that in every community and for every story, there are at least another couple, if not more, versions of the same story.
Do you think by that it helps you see the world differently? Can you be a better innovator? Like if you learn a lot of languages, can you innovate, create, be more creative?
I think that any kind of diverse thought that we add into the mix, and I'm talking about open, true diversity and not tokenistic diversity, which we often see in companies, for example, where it's a check mark on a form. I've been to diversity training and you hear the comments in the kind of corridors of, yeah, they're sending me on this course, so I'm going to go and do it. And I'll check off that I've done it. And then I will put it on my 3-month appraisal form that I've done this. And now I've satisfied everyone that I am truly diverse. And I mean, I'm talking true diversity because the richness of that really comes from understanding the whys, the wherefores, and what it actually means for your day to day. And so do people buy into this? Some do, some get it, but many don't. And through learning many languages, certainly what I have seen is the questions that I get asked back about things that I believe are common sense. They're the things that I find the most revealing and most rewarding, because common sense all of a sudden seems nonsensical sometimes.
Do you have an example for that?
Yeah, of course. So let me take my own culture, the United Kingdom. Now I'm going to say something that's going to be highly challenging for many Brits.
Go for it.
So the idea of queuing, and this is queuing in the United Kingdom is something that seemed, well, deemed almost as sacred. It's almost holy. It's a thing that you have to do to be a good person. It makes sense because it gives order, and to a degree, yes. But sometimes Brits take it too far. So many times you'll see Brits join a queue because a queue is there. They don't necessarily know what the queue is for, but they suppose it might be for what they want, but they don't want to be impolite and jump the queue or be seen as jumping the queue, even if that's not their intention. Now, if I take the Balkans, where queuing is a little bit more haphazard, and knowing the person at the front of the queue who's actually working and doing the task might be a benefit that you can use to jump the queue, actually that also has its negative sides, but sometimes it has its positive sides as well. So sometimes going to the front of the queue, and even if somebody gets annoyed, it might be just a simple question that the person can answer in a second. And that could be, is this the right queue for whatever it is I'm doing? Fill in the blank. And that person then doesn't waste half an hour of their time by joining a queue that they don't need to be in, just to be told to join the next queue or the next queue or the next queue. And these are things that I've seen it growing up in the United Kingdom, that people will do this because they're afraid of being impolite or being shouted at. Because queue jumping is a social offence in the UK, that you will be publicly shouted at by other Brits waiting patiently in a queue. And so, as you see, the black and white of this argument has a shade of grey that's often not explored when we think we're right.
So how do you do it? Because with all these different languages in your mind and different cultures, I assume, do you queue in the UK and jump the queue when you're back in Skopje?
No, I do both. So I take on elements of the cultures of places, and what makes sense to me makes sense to me. So in the UK, I risk getting shouted at sometimes to just ask the right question, because it doesn't make sense to me anymore. And I'm not afraid to the same degree as I was many years ago of just asking the question. I will ask, is this the right queue for what I need?
But don't you start to become a misfit then all the time? Because you have all these different ways of thinking in your head, and you're never thinking the right way anymore.
Of course, but isn't it the misfits that innovate? Isn't it the misfits that start a new trend? Isn't it the misfits that lead change and challenge the status quo to innovate and to move forward and to push forward in society?
Yeah, and in your experience, when you see the top managers from around the world, from the big companies, do you think they speak enough foreign languages?
Which country are they from? Very often, if they're from certain parts of the world, particularly the Anglosphere, potentially not. Now, do they need to? Depending on the level at which they're working. Very often, I mean, as much as I love languages, I have to also admit that there's a functionality of speaking a common language in certain meetings. So if we're talking about big multinationals, they will often have as an institutional language a given language, whether that's English, whether that's Chinese, whatever it is. They will use that. And they'll use it for practical reasons because they need to make sure they're working on a level that everyone can use the same communication method. Otherwise, you're relying on translation or you're relying on translation software, and that may or may not give the right message. So if you have an agreed upon communication method, then that would make sense. So does it make sense to conduct meetings every single time in multiple languages? Well, there's a cost factor involved for any business or kind of country level to do that. There are also issues with if you don't do it and if you allow people to only speak one language. The flip side is maybe some people won't take part to the same degree because they don't feel as confident or as comfortable. They can't manipulate the language in the same way. The English speakers generally of this world have the power balance in their favor. So we talk a lot nowadays about privileges, and one privilege is English speaking privilege. And we have to be aware of that. And as English speakers, I think that what we need to do is also learn the art of silence and open questions, to ask people, invite people. Because if we are going to use English, or we're going to use French, or we're going to use Chinese, or whatever language that is, if it's your language that you feel most comfortable in, learn the art of silence and humility and allow somebody else to speak.
So someone who speaks 50 languages tells you learn the art of silence and listen, basically.
Listening is always going to be a key thing.
Yeah.
Because if you just talk, you end up living your life in an echo chamber where you hear echoed back to you the words that you speak. And who learns necessarily from the words they speak? It can clarify your thoughts.
Yep.
Definitely do that in your own space, because speaking out loud or talking to people or friends or just having a chit chat with people, it can be something that can be seen as a waste of time in business sometimes. So people will say, oh, talking around the cooler, chit-chatting. Well, if you're having a chit-chat about work that's not actually necessarily a meeting or necessarily with a specific goal in mind, what it can do is it can condense and purify your thoughts to a point that it can actually generate new ideas. Sometimes even if you're the main speaker in that group, because you're like, oh, actually, when I think about that, it doesn't make sense, or it needs to be understood a bit differently, or it needs to be reworded. And it helps you to find things. So that's definitely important. But in a meeting where your goal is to explore ideas and to talk to people and to find out what they need and what they want, silence is actually very, very important.
Silence is very important. I would like to see, if we speak about C-level executives and other managers, how would they take the time to learn a foreign language? Because it's time consuming, isn't it?
It is a time-consuming endeavor. And over the whole COVID period, I started talking to people online on my YouTube channel. And I was going live once a week, answering and asking questions about language and language learning. And I started to see patterns in what people would ask me, and the kinds of questions I would answer would come again and again and again and again and again. And so about a year later, I started forming groups of people, and I started calling them language learning therapy sessions. And this is a type of language coaching. I mean, it's not that I'm a therapist, but what I discovered really was the individual paths and the individual needs of each person on this planet. They're all going to be slightly different. And what they need is an analysis of what's going on in their world, what's going on in their day-to-day, what's going on in their reality, what their needs are, what they think their needs are, and what their goals are and what they think their goals are. These can all be different things. And so an honest dialogue and holding a mirror up to somebody sometimes is the most advantageous thing you can do to be able to achieve language learning goals. And then setting targets, looking at materials and all that kind of stuff. But that for me is almost a secondary thing, because once you've sorted out the reality of your space and your time and your life, then learning the language actually becomes a thing that you can add in quite easily.
So to have a concrete example there, you had this challenge of learning Estonian in 30 days. How did you get the idea for this and how did that go?
I was in the middle of the summer in COVID times. So it was a strange time for everyone. I had nowhere to go. I had very few meetings and I had a break in some projects I was doing. But I knew that I had this whole month where I could do something. And instead of sitting there and watch TV or Netflix or whatever, I'll do something with the time. And I saw this application where I could learn Estonian. And I thought, you know what, I've always loved the sound of Estonian. And why not try it? But I'll do it for a month. So I contacted the app and said to them, look, I'd love to use your app for a month and show people how I get on all through the month and then see where it leads. And as it was, this TV station in Estonia heard about what I was doing and they were interested. An Estonian institute in London heard about it and made some noise about it too. And I ended up studying this language almost as a full-time job during that month. So my active study time was about 4 hours a day.
Wow.
And then my thinking time and practice in the language possibly added up to another 3 or 4 hours a day.
That's very intensive.
It's very intensive. Not something I necessarily recommend to people, but it was something I wanted to do to see if I was still capable of picking up a language to a point where I could communicate that quickly. I'd done it with German many, many years ago after university, but I continued the intensity of German up until very recently, when I don't use it every single day as much as I used to, but I used it for many, many years very intensively.
And just one side remark, sorry, Estonian, for people who are not familiar with the language, it's quite close to Finnish, but that's about it. So if you don't speak Finnish, Estonian was pretty much starting from scratch because everything is different in that language.
Yes and no.
Aha, okay.
So I had done some Finnish before, but it was many years previous and I hadn't used it for a long time. So it only ever got to a basic intermediate level, maybe like an A2, B1 level. But I didn't use it, so it had kind of fallen back to the wayside. And when I started learning Estonian, I actually started to see the influences from German in Estonian that we're not often aware of, but it's impacted on the way some of the verbs work. It's impacted on some certain vocabulary, things that you see, for example, around the kitchen, foodstuffs, things like that. So there was a bit of help, and surprisingly so, right?
Okay.
But not so much, because as you rightly said, it's a very different language group. It's a non-Indo-European language. So it's fairly different.
So what's the level you reached after these months of intensive work?
I would say that it was around about an A2-ish level, maybe. And I say maybe because these are very difficult things to judge. So I can make a comparison for you. I had studied at that point, I think I'd just done 1 year of Cornish, which is the sister language of Welsh. And I'd sat my exam in Cornish, and that was kind of an A1-ish level. And I felt more confident speaking Estonian than Cornish, even though Cornish is a related language to a language I speak. Estonian wasn't. And so I felt, okay, I speak it better than I speak Cornish. And I felt more confident. And probably because of the intensity, but also the amount of words I pedaled through and cycled through on a daily basis. It was roughly at a stage at that point where I could do things. And the thing I was actually most proud of during that period was not the interview that you see online. The Estonian's flawed, but that's to be expected. It was a month of Estonian.
Yep.
But I got through a TV interview, which in and of itself looks like the impressive thing. Not for me. The impressive thing for me was actually setting up the interview on TV through the medium of Estonian with the runners on the TV show. And you don't see that, but that's the thing that for me was the litmus test. Has this worked? Can I communicate something to a point that I agree something with somebody else And the communication leads to a product, a finished thing that you can see.
So you were
And it
using the
did.
language itself to get to speak about it. That's quite a feature, yeah.
And so for me, that was the big achievement. It wasn't necessarily being on Estonian TV, even though I appreciate that that probably for most people would be seen as the thing that, oh, wow, that's amazing. No, it's actually using it, which is, for me, the best thing.
So for Estonian, how many words did you have to use or learn in that month? And how did you learn them?
So the app itself cycles through lots and lots of vocabulary. It teaches you words based on sort of how frequently they appear in the language, but in context, not just random words. So the words that are used in certain phrases, sentences that you would commonly find online. So the frequency list was based on frequency within a context. So that helped. Then they also had dialogues that you could read and listen to, and they would also contain the words that you'd seen within a given set of lessons. And then it recommended music and things like that. So I would then listen to Estonian music during my downtime. And then I also took lessons online. I had an Estonian teacher. I would just practice all of these expressions and words and phrases and try and manipulate them to make them relevant to my life. I think it was over 2,000. It may have been more words. I can't quite remember. But it was quite a lot of words for being able to communicate and speak and answer questions.
Yeah, 2,000 words, A2/B1, okay. Do you use memory hooks or these famous memory castles where you go through an imaginary castle and you remember all the words as they appear in your mind? Do you use any of these techniques?
Memory champions that I use would be the invention of stories that help to learn words that you don't naturally find easy to recall. So particularly for words that you want to recall, whether it's for a test or whether it's for actual use or whatever else. And they are stories that often you have to be quite inventive to be able to do it. And I don't know how much it's actually the amount you focus on remembering the words and the idea of story building that actually helps the whole process of remembering it and getting it to stick that is the thing. But certainly it works. Now, if you're using memory, you refer to memory castles, I know them as memory palaces. And whether it's a castle, a house, a palace, or a tent, you can use many different places to place these things where you have spaces within the rooms or on sort of furniture or wherever else for things to visit, and you visually make your way through, you travel through these spaces, you look at them and you remember them. They're very, very good for people who are learning, for example, lists of words or facts or whatever that they want to recall in a certain order, potentially, or just to recall generally. I'm not able to use those very confidently or quickly as a palace that I walk through in a fast-flowing conversation. So what I find is those elements fade into the background unless I revisit a route to do that. So once I figure out that they are words that I need and the words that are important, because also figuring out which words are important is part of the language learning process. Just learning all of the words for all of the vegetables, if you don't even see half of them in your day-to-day life, well, you're not going to remember them all. And if they're not part of that culture, how are you going to recall them? So you figure out quite quickly which words you need and which words you don't need. And this is sort of a neurological pruning, as I think neuroscientists talk about this, where the brain naturally removes links and stuff to allow the brain to be more agile and nimble, to recall and recollect things that are important at certain moments during your life, during the day. So yeah, I do, but I don't then worry too much about them after I've used them for the initial memorization to then get the practice and repetition in, because they need to become words that are automatic.
And that's automatic part. I love learning languages, and I love actually taking a vocabulary list and downing it. I don't know why, but I love that. And what I realized, I usually take exams after 3 months, 1 year, to make sure that I know which level I've reached. Now, in exams, it's quite easy for me to do the reading aspect, but then I usually lack the speed that you were mentioning when I have to speak and use the language. So How do you get that speed in Estonian, for example? And is it still here 1-2 years later with Estonian, for example?
So the speed and getting practice, like when you practice anything, if you don't do it, you're not going to necessarily get better at it just by thinking about it and hoping for it and crossing your fingers and wishing. Unfortunately, it's doing and practicing that's the trick. Just like people going to the gym, your muscles are going to get used to certain activities at the gym if you perform certain exercises or tasks whilst you're there. And almost as well, like when you drive to work, some people may get in their car, they drive to work, they know the route, and it almost becomes automatic. And sometimes you'll hear people say, do you know, I don't even remember how I got to work. I don't remember the route, because it's become so automatic that you just get there. And that's kind of what you need to do with language to be able to get to that automatic stage in just using it. You need to practice it to that point. So a language is a thing that we learn to the point that it becomes automatic.
But for Estonian, for example, you managed to pass, let's say, A2 level and have an interview in the language. Is it still here? It's a very intensive way of learning. Is it still here 1 or 2 years later?
No, it isn't, because the other important factor is you need it over a certain period of time. So a month, 2 months, 3 months, even a year isn't often enough for something to become completely ingrained in your brain.
Mm-hmm.
It's, relatively speaking, in a lifespan, a very short amount of time. And so if you're not using the language that often, or you use it intensively for a very short period of time, even up to a year or so, is it realistic then to expect to remember all of that?
No.
Probably not. Because in the long term, that's a very short period of time. And if you have no contact with the language, particularly during that time, well, it's even less likely that you're going to remember it. Has all my Estonian disappeared and gone? That would also be unrealistic as well, because there are going to be elements of the language that have remained. There are going to be certain parts of the language that have imprinted on my brain, and I remember more easily than others. So if I pick up an Estonian language learning book, for example, and read it, for sure I'm going to be able to make sense of a lot. It's not going to be like starting again from the very beginning. And so you often hear about people saying a language becomes rusty and you need to scrape off the rust. The thing is, if you don't have enough metal underneath the rust, and you're only going to get a nice thick metal over years and years and years and years of practice, if you then scrape the rust off, there's enough metal left for it to mean something. If there isn't, you scrape through the rust, and what happens? It just causes a hole. Because the metal wasn't strong enough, it just all turned to rust.
I like this image that you have. Now, to have enough metal, I guess what you need to do is to practice. And in one of your videos, you also touched the topic, artificial intelligence, ChatGPT, and the like. How would you use this as a help for language learning, first of all?
So AI can be a very useful tool. Now it's moving on all the time, but you can ask a question in a given language and see what it will come up with. It works better or worse depending on the language. So some languages, like Cornish, for example, it's hit and miss. But other languages, you can be fairly sure that the language is going to be quite good and it's going to be fairly accurate. So you can ask questions that are important to you, maybe even practice getting things reworded or checked or rewritten. Ask it to give you quizzes. You can ask ChatGPT, you say, I'm learning these verbs in Italian, please give me a quiz on the imperfect tense. And it will ask you questions to see if you get the forms right. And then you can check your answers again. So there are certain real ways you can do that. You could even ask AI to write you a story to teach you a specific word. And you could say, write a short story to teach me the word for fish in French. And then it will write a story to teach the word fish. And it will use it in different ways. And you could ask it then to create memory hooks if you wanted to get some ideas, I guess. Try and break this word down in a sensible way that would help me to use the elements of the sounds of the word to attach to other words I would know as an English speaker, so that it will be easier for me to recollect remember this word in the future.
So basically,
And
it
you
will
could
be
even
possible to create your own customized digital course for language learning. So you can say what you want to know, where you're from, as you said, and there it goes. It creates the perfect course, especially catered to your needs.
Yeah, I'm going to call out perfect, but yes, the rest of it I agree with. The reason I don't say perfect is because it's not infallible. There's a fallibility that comes with AI at the moment. So to give you an example, I had a set of terms and conditions that I wanted to buy a product, and I fed the terms and conditions into AI, and I asked the question, I have bought another product previously, and would the conditions for this new element apply retrospectively to the thing I've already bought? And AI told me no. And I said, because it wasn't clear to me when I read it, and I thought maybe I was missing something, so I wanted to test it. So I said, okay, please give me the parts of the terms and conditions that mean that this is a no for my question. Why is it a negative answer? And ChatGPT said, on reflection, actually, I don't know. It's not clear.
You need
Now,
to check it, yeah.
I could have stopped the process at no and not bought.
Yeah.
Fortunately, I didn't listen to ChatGPT, and I did question it. And then I read it again myself more clearly. And then I asked the question, based on this, could it also then be applicable that it's fine to use retrospectively? And ChatGPT had to agree, yes. So I got a yes, don't know, yes answer based on the same information and the same question from the same ChatGPT.
So it's not
And
that
then I bought it.
reliable in a way for now, yeah.
Look, be a laziness within the human condition, I think, where we like to think that we've got something now and we can just stop thinking. It's almost like, let's stop thinking now. We can just do it and automate it.
And we can stop learning languages. That's something from the past. It's going to be a leisure only.
Well, this is the thing, right? It can sort of throw everything out. The same token, we don't throw the baby out with the bathwater either. We do need to make sure that we use these tools because they are useful tools. So we innovate and we think outside the box. How do we incorporate them and how do we use them in a clever manner, in an intelligent way, so that artificial intelligence meets human intelligence together?
Yeah, working together, like when you learn languages. You speak about innovation. We all spoke a year ago about the metaverse. Now it's out of fashion and AI has overtaken it. But what do you think about 3D worlds and immersive environments like this for practicing languages?
The ones I saw many years ago, I actually found really interesting to try out and to play with. And I would like to think that we'd be able to do this kind of thing in the future. I don't know where we are. Apple just brought out these new headsets, right, where you have mixed reality. I've not tried it. And I think things have moved on quite a lot since the first ones I tried. But it's always interesting to see where these things go. I don't know where this will naturally go. Who thought that we'd be where we are today with AI? Who thought it was going to take off in the way it's taken off? It's almost impossible to completely, with accuracy, predict where the tendencies and where people will move. But all I can say is it's very exciting. And I think that if there's a way to integrate this in a less cumbersome manner, these big headsets, I don't think outside of very specific environments are the future. If I'm honest, I think that the smart glasses that we saw before, these kind of size, the technology is still not there to be able to make that happen, as I understand. We're still a little bit away to get the microchips and the screens and whatever working for this kind of size. But who knows? The world moves on very, very quickly, as we've seen. And when I was growing up, we didn't even have a computer at home. So.
Yeah. And the smart glasses might be a good option in the future when they are like the glasses we wear. You would look at your house and you would have little tags on all the pieces of furniture in a place in the language you're learning. Or
I could envision something like you buy some sunglasses, for example, or glasses like these, and then you have maybe a button on the side and you click it if you want it on, or you click it off if you just want to wear them as sunglasses. You could have something maybe like that as well, where you have them on and off and you and then ask questions. It has maybe a microphone somewhere. You attach it to a Bluetooth to your phone in a first stage of it. There are going to be iterations, obviously, of these. But I can imagine a world where that would become quite normal. And maybe for navigation, for example, and then you could add language learning to that kind of thing, where instead of looking on your phone to where you're going and listening to it, you actually see an arrow pointing. So you have kind of a mixed reality type thing where it's pointing in the direction you need to go, but in your glasses, so you don't have to look down all the time.
The last technology where I would like to pick your brains on, and I don't know if you're familiar with it too much, but the blockchain, could this have any use in the language world in one way or another, or would you have a take on that?
Blockchain technology, generally speaking, I think is used obviously for the currencies that we see around the world, and clearly a number of these language learning opportunities stem from language businesses. So there's a linkage in that way in terms of how you build a business and how you maybe sell that business and how it works. And then there are sort of elements where you, within Web3 as it was, that where people saw this idea of selling parts of an idea or a concept in the form of maybe a picture or something, people investing in something that they have, maybe it's a course, maybe it's whatever else, and you then sell it on and you use the blockchain technology in that way. Now, I'm not the expert on how this works, but from what I've understood of how this technology works, I could imagine, for example, that if you have courses that maybe, let's take Michel Thomas, because his course sold for tens of thousands of dollars when he was alive in the US. He would train stars or whatever else. I could imagine a point where you'd have people where they'd sell their own specific courses. They might be copyrighted, but you could sell them on for a price and even make money just on a course that's not readily available to everyone. It could be a premier thing, right? Like a product. So why not?
Okay. There's some ideas there. Richard, I'm enjoying our discussion. We're nearing the end of our interview here. How is Skopje treating you? You're in New Macedonia, right?
I am in Warsaw, actually, at the moment.
Oh, yeah.
So Warsaw is treating me very well. It's a beautiful city. And I've just come from a language event called the Polyglot Gathering. And it's the sister event to the language conference called the Polyglot Conference that I set up initially in 2013, the first of its kind in the world. And I'm very, very pleased to be able to come to the Polyglot Gathering to support and to talk at the event and to meet other like-minded people. For me, it's a great honor to be able to do that. And I love speaking and engaging with different people from all over the world. So this opportunity to travel again, I don't take it for granted. Mm-hmm. We've spent a few years indoors from COVID. Mm-hmm. And so getting the option to move around out of the Balkans, and the Balkans are beautiful, but it's nice to be able to travel again.
I agree with you. What is the next language you're going to learn?
At the moment, I am focusing on Celtic languages. So I have just finished my grade 3 Cornish exam, and there's one more level of that I can study. So I have to learn the old texts and then the language to get ready for the exams. That takes 2 years. And then I've been dabbling in Irish and Scottish Gaelic as well.
Wow.
And right now I'm getting ready for the Polyglot Conference in Budapest in Hungary.
I've seen
that.
So
I hope to learn some more Hungarian, ready for the end of October when we'll all be getting together again and speaking. It would be lovely to see you there. And maybe you can bring some of your world and how languages intersect your world as a talk or something at the event.
Oh, thanks. Great pleasure, Richard. It's been a great pleasure chatting with you. Thanks for all your insights. I'm sure we could talk much longer about it. But thank you for sparing the time, and maybe see you over there in the months to come.
Yeah, that'd be lovely.
Have a good
all
one.
The best. Thank you.
Take care.
Take care.
Ciao, ciao. That's all for today's episode, where we brought you some of the latest and greatest from the languages, education, and technology worlds. Thanks for listening, and thanks to our guest for sharing their valuable insights with us. If you struggle to capture the knowledge of your expert, contact us. We'll record engaging interviews with them for you to share. If you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe to our channel and leave us a review on your favorite podcast platform. You can also find us on YouTube or LinkedIn, where you can watch the full video of this interview and many others. This interview was made possible thanks to our colleagues Laura Servadio for the coordination of this interview and Patrice Séjalon for a powerful remote interview studio based on AI. Till next time, stay safe and stay insured. Cheers!